It's these rainy nights or rainy afternoons that the chair creaks the most. Let's see whether or not Twitch thinks we're online. It says live. There we go, we're online. Hurrah! Let's go tell the world. Streaming game dev. I'm gonna do some pretty cool debris stuff. Paste. Oh, and all of a sudden I am starving. That's great. Great timing, right? Come on, there we are. Alright, so in the past couple of days, in the past week or so, I have worked on this project to get the debris working fast enough that I can actually feel like I am able to put debris in the scene. And you can see now that we're running at a reasonable frame rate, and we have this giant pile of debris. And that's great. It even has physics attached to it, pseudo-physics. The problem is that I don't need a giant ball of debris. What I need is a spray of debris. So what we're going to do today is we're going to turn that from a ball into a spray. The good news is I already have a very similar set of debris. You can see it right here. I can turn it back on. Hit play. And take a look. Boom. Pause it. Look it down here. You can see that spray of debris. That's what we're going to do. The problem is that this debris down here is actual game objects. And that is extremely expensive and dumb. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the same basic process, but we're going to use my new method, which doesn't have any game objects except for the initial broadcaster. So these objects we've got down here, we're going to replace with this object that is here at the center. Just move it on down for now. So the key to this is that we need something to define how our object is going to spray, how the debris field is going to form. I've been using these quads. They vanish when we hit play, but as they are here in the scene view, they allow us to quickly determine what sort of spray we're likely to see. In truth, what I need to do is create a gizmo. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a game object inside of this debris system, and then use a gizmo to show it in even more detail. So for that sake, we could also do it without a gizmo. We could do it without a game object if we would like. Why don't we try it without the game object first? We'll try and make it as clean as possible, right? Grind, grind, grind. There we go. Alright, so here we have the draw instanced object. This is the class that is doing that bundle of debris. We're going to just turn it from a bundle into a spray. And that means that we're going to have to replace this radius with something. For now, let's go ahead and punch in two more numbers. Public, float, height. We could actually just use a vector 2. Public vector 2. What do you want to call it? Spray scale? Spray surface? Spray surface. Spray size. There we are. And what we're going to do with this is make it a new vector2.1 just for default's sake. And then we'll change it. But we need to have a visual that shows it to us, because right now it's going to be visible off to the side, but we're not really going to be able to tell how big we're talking. So we'll pop on down to the end of the class and we'll add in a new void on draw gizmos, or on gizmo draw. I think it's on draw gizmos. Let's just go ahead and see whether this is correct by typing in debug.log. And that should give us a little clue as to whether or not it is being drawn. Grind, grind, grind. Give me that. There we are. There you can see it. So that is correct. That's the correct name. What we're going to want to do here is draw a special gizmo. So we'll say gizmos.color equals, we can make it any color we'd like. How about some blue? Cyan is probably better than blue. There we are. And then we can say gizmos.set. No, what is it? It's gizmos.matrix? Gizmos.matrix. So basically what happens here is there is a gizmo thing called a frustum. Here it is, right here. We can set this to our position, transform.position, and a field of view of our choice. Let's go ahead and make it 30. With a max range of radius and a min range of 0, and an aspect of the height and width ratio, which would be our height divided by our width. So that would be, or our width divided by our height. So that would be spray size.y divided by spray size.x, right? Now the problem with this approach is that when we actually see it here in the view, shaboom, you can see that it is doing something bizarre. It is attempting to write to a location way over here in the center of the world. Now the reason for that is because it's using the camera that's in the game world, I believe. Or maybe it's not using camera at all. I'm not actually sure what's going on. Those other three are just duplicates of the object I'm editing right now, so that's why they show up. But clearly this is wrong. It's not pointed the correct way. It's not doing anything. And the reason for that is simply that our gizmos aren't set up with the correct matrix. So we can set the matrix right here, and we can set it up to be our matrix. I think that I need it to be world to local. I'm not 100% sure. Let's just take a look. This is the first time I've done this, so it is going to be an exploration. So now you can see what I've got is gizmos starting at 0, 0, 0 and pointed the correct direction, but not actually doing the right thing. Let's delete the other ones just so that we don't get confused. You can see that it's not at the correct location. It's at 0, 0, 0. I think that that might just be the wrong matrix. Let's try the other one. But I think that this is also wrong. Grind, grind, grind. Oh, no, that's actually... I think that there is something that I'm missing. Hold on just a moment here. Gizmos dot... Because you can draw a lot of things. Like, I could draw, like, a cube. The problem with a cube... let's go ahead and try it with a cube, just because that way we will know for sure what sort of sizes we're looking for, whether the matrix is working. So do transform.position, and then the size will be the spray size. Now that will automatically turn over into a vector 3 with a z of 0, which should give us a perfectly flat plane. Oh, it didn't like that very much. Oh, I put a little quote in here. Brilliant. Grind, grind, grind. I actually don't have any idea where it's drawing that cube. But you know where it's not drawing that cube is here. Alright, I think that I am misunderstanding the Gizmos matrix. Hey, Elboetchi. I'm setting up some fun debris spray stuff. It's going to be a little while because I have to figure out how gizmos.matrix is supposed to work. I thought I knew it, but clearly I was wrong. So fortunately there's loads of tutorials. Here's one by a guy named Nicholas. And he's using local to world matrix. So we'll go ahead and do that, local to world matrix. And then here we'll just go ahead and make it a vector 3. And we'll pass it a vector 2. Okay, so there's no way to pass it just a vector 2. Spray size.y. I know that it gets cast automatically, but there's something I'm not confident about here. So we're going to go ahead and make it full size just to be sure that it's actually a cube. Oh, I know what the problem is. I'm just a friggin' idiot. That's the problem is. Oh, you friggin' moron. since I'm drawing it in local space, I don't need to tell it to draw it at my position. My position is going to be correct as it is. Voila. So here we've got it correct. This is a 1x1x60 box. If I were to change this spray size, you can see that it changes the size of the box. And moreover, unlike most gizmos, when I rotate this, the box rotates. See? So the frustrum is definitely a better choice. Let's go ahead and resurrect that and see whether or not we can get that to work. Elboichi says, what are we working on today? Right now we're creating a debris spray, which is going to be fun. The problem is that I'm trying to figure out how to get this frustrum to show a spray of debris. And this is the correct sort of thing I want, but what I want is to cut it here. So what I could always do is, instead of making it from 0, I can make it from like radius times 2 and radius divided by 2. And this could be, instead of 0, it could be vector3.forward times negative radius. And that would just pull the frustrum back that way and then show us with a box right here. More or less correct, yes. However, it's obviously not lined up properly. The min range and the max range should be more aligned. I wonder why that is. If we make this 0, it's probably going to go all the way back, correct? Yeah. Okay, so hold on. I mistook something. I don't know. I don't really know how frustrums work is the problem. And that means that I am a little bit dumb when I try and do this stuff and I try and make it just work. But using common sense, as if common sense was a thing that applied to Unity. There we go. That is what I like to see. So we can change the spray size, and you'll be able to see how it works. But you can see the spray size is actually inverted from what you might expect. What we've got here is our FOV needs to be related to our X rather than just being a flat 30. However, I think this might be wrong. It might have to be X divided by Y. And then probably times something, now that I'm thinking about it. So now when we increase the X scale, you know what, a box might be better. I can figure this out some other time. I can't really figure out why it is difficult to draw this, but I know how to draw it as a box, and a box is good enough. So there we are. Problem with the box is that the depth of the box is actually a little wrong. So we're going to want to actually make this forward times radius divided by 2. There we are. That's how we want it. Yeah. And that means that the box will actually be put at our root. Boom. Like so. And as we change the X and the Y, we can just see the box scale properly, right? That's how we would like it to be. So now what we're going to do is delete these old debris systems. These debris fillers are old school, they're slow, and they're clumsy. This bounding box debris system is going to be much better, and we just need to make sure that it is in the right place and pointed the right way. So something like this will work fine. Just scale it up. Now I know that there are ways to make a handle set for that box, which would be nice, but I don't happen to have it memorized or anything, so we're just going to do it like this for now, and later on we can try and figure out the best way to set it up with some handles. Abaz says, no, never concede. Well, if you know how frustrums work, and you know how to make it so that the frustrum maps properly to the X and Y size I need, I'm all ears. But I don't know how the details work. I don't know how to get it to be wider when I increase X, but without lowering the Y and stuff like that. I'll try and figure it out on my own some other time, but This is not a whole lot worse, it's just a little bit worse, so I'm happy enough just having the green. So what we're going to want to do here is, here in our start, we have this method of spraying objects. There it is right there. What we're actually going to want to do is replace this position with, instead of inside unit sphere, it's going to be inside of the XY axis that we have defined. So we're going to go ahead and say pos A equals new vector 2 with our X and our Y maximums. So random.value times, what did I call it? Spray size. Spray size dot X, random.value times spray size dot Y, and then a 0 for the third element. There we are. And then what we do is we convert that into our local space. So pos A equals transform dot local to world matrix. Oh, no, sorry, it's transform dot point. What's it called? Transform point? Yeah. And that'll give us a world coordinate that is on the surface of our plane that we're defining. And now if I hit play, we can see this happen. See it? Perfect. Let's go ahead and drag that debris system over here just so that we can get an easier look at it rather than having to manually keep panning around, you know? There, that's fine. So we do have it working, but now what we need to do is we need to raycast down towards the surface and then use that position as our new baseline. So what we're going to do is going to do a raycast hit, and then we're going to do an if physics.raycast, and then we can determine our ray as pos A and then transform.forward. It's actually negative transform.forward. And then we're going to want a max distance of our radius, and then we're going to want a, there's no layer mask, out hit info. Out hit info. There we are. Why didn't that, oh, there. There we are. So if we don't actually encounter anything, then we're going to want to continue because we're only going to want to hit things. We're only going to want to create points that actually exist. Problem with that is right now we are using a really strict 1,000 by 1,000 by 1,000 system. So we have to retry if we are going to do this. So we're going to go ahead and create an error counter, int error counter equals 0. Here I'll say error counter plus plus. If error counter is greater than 1,000, then we're going to go ahead and reduce the number of verts that we're supposed to have. Well, I guess we don't want that, do we? We're just going to die. Debug.log error. I can't really find a surface for, and then name, and then to project onto. Another thing we could do is we could just put the debris on the plane, but I don't like that idea because then what it'll happen is it'll be like, well, I'll show you when we actually get there because it's hard to explain just by waving my hand around when no one can see it, right? So, error counter equals 0, or just return. We'll just not do anything. We'll just die. There. So once we have the point that we need, what we're going to need to do is move it out away from the surface of whatever it landed on by up to our range. Then I have to grab these here. These are all things that we're going to want to put inside of this loop. And then we'll go ahead and say float range equals, don't call it range, float extend equals radius times random.value. Now what we can really do here is all sorts of squaring and stuff to try and make this feel more natural. we're going to go ahead and give this a position which is out away from our forward vector times extend times radius. Except we don't have to do that because extend already has radius built into it, so it's just extend. But what we don't want to do is just use transform.forward, because what we really want to do is have it blast off in a cone. So we're going to modify transform.forward by a random value, which is going to be random dot on unit sphere. And then we're going to make that the normal version, and then we're going to multiply it by extend. And that'll bring us out in just a general cone away from the surface. Another thing we could do is we could deviate away from the center point of our system. That's actually a little bit better, so I'm going to change it to do that. So rather than transform.forward modified by a random sphere, we're going to want to do it transform.forward modified by our position relative to our XY coordinate. So that's going to be pause a minus transform.position.normalized. There we are. And then that will skew us away from the center of our location. However, since it's normalized, we're going to get a rather ugly spray. It's going to be very chunky. I guess we'll be okay. We'll give it a shot and see how it looks. But the problem here is that I'm actually adding something to pause A, and that's not what I want to do, because pause A equals hit.point plus that, because we're basing it on where we encountered, right? So this should work. All I'm doing is I'm saying every time we want an object, could you raycast from a random point on the surface we've defined, and if you hit something, that's where the object should start. Move it away from the object by whatever your settings are. And that should allow us to create debris in a cone. Now that should work, but right now our setup is really pretty terrible because our radius is only 100, which is just not very long. We'll go ahead and make it like 350. It's actually still not long enough. We'll go ahead and make it like 575, something like that. And then if we hit play, we should be able to see a cone of debris. I don't see a cone of debris. Can't find a surface to project it onto. So that means that... Okay, so there is the debris that actually worked. So it looks like we got some debris, and then the surface projection issues, just to make sure these aren't like leftovers. No, they're all part of this. The surface projection issues then came to the fore because we were projecting and we weren't finding any surface. And I can see why. We're not actually on the surface proper. So let's just move this until we are. We can adjust this later. The sudden failure thing is probably not the best way. Yeah, see how we're getting that sudden failure a lot? So we're going to go ahead and take that sudden failure out of the equation. What I was going to do is reduce the number of points that we were trying to make, but the problem is that if I do that, I have to redefine all of these arrays, and that ends up meaning I have to start over. So we're just going to go ahead and just assume, but this is like really bad. So here we're going to go ahead and say if error counter is greater than number, because that means that you have a hit rate of greater than 50%, or less than 50%, which means that you aren't really... Okay, so apparently we do have a miss rate that is that high. But I think I found what the problem is. It's not actually broadcasting onto the surface that I wanted it to. And that's because I forgot to tell it to use the whole square. Right now it's only using one quadrant. And in fact, I think the problem is it's using this area. So what I have to do is subtract out half of the sizes. So minus spray size.x divided by 2, and then here we're going to do spray size.y minus spray size.y divided by 2. Boom. Better. Much better. So there you can see we now have a spray of debris. It's a very pretty little spray. It's very simple to make, as you can see, and it's programmatic. Just to remind you, this spray of debris is fully interactive, and we can bump them. So, bonk. Bonk. Pretty neat, right? Bonk. Bonk, bonk. Bonk. So there are a couple of things that we want to do in order to make this a little bit better. One of the things we need to do is make it so the size is larger at the surface and tapers off into smaller values as you move away. Right now our scale here is just a random value lerp. What we're going to want to do is get that as a value. So float percent equals random.value, and then here we'll use percent, and then here we will also use percent. But this is actually min scale, max scale, and it needs to be max scale, min scale, or else we would get larger as we, that's not how you spell percent, that's pre-percent. Robotic Sarcasm says, I wanted to pop in and say thanks for your video on GPU instancing. Well, if you want to know more about GPU instancing, I am right now working on it. So, as always, the biggest barrier towards making your GPU instancing work is spelling things correctly. There we go. So now you can see that our debris gets smaller as it moves away from the surface, but it's still nice and heavy down at the base down here. Now, I don't know whether or not, when I'm streaming this to Twitch, I really have no idea what the Twitch viewers see. I'm getting 70 frames a second, but I sincerely doubt that Twitch is streaming this at 70 frames a second. I think I've actually got it locked to 30 for the sake of streaming. So you might not be able to feel the smoothness quite as well as you'd be able to if you were actually playing the game. Now what I can see here is that our debris is heavier towards the surface, but it's not as much heavier as I'd like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this max scale 4, just to see whether or not that makes it more clear. Yeah, that's more like what I want to see. So basically, I want you to see mostly debris on the surface. I don't want you to think about the stuff that's behind the debris too much. Yeah, that'll do it. That's the ticket. Bonk. Push it aside. Push. Okay. So now we're just going to duplicate this and do it again for a different set of debris. So for that, we're going to move it over here, rotate it a little bit differently, like this. We're going to move it a little bit away from the surface, like so. And then we're going to radically increase the X component. Like that. And you can see that that's not going to work because some parts of it are inside of the volume that we're going to be colliding against. So we'll just keep moving it around until it looks correct. Just a little bit more. There we are. Maybe a little bit less spin. There we are. Let's try that. Robot says it's definitely not 60 plus frames per second. Yeah, that's just because of the streaming I've got. I set it to be locked at 30, I think, or 29.97 or something. So that's not going to be indicative. The 75 that you're seeing in the upper right-hand corner is what you'd actually see if you were playing. Although I do have a decent enough computer, so maybe you wouldn't get 75. But the point is, this is a super cheap way to make debris. Can you believe that all of this debris is costing me 0 frames a second? It runs at the same speed whether I've got this debris in the scene or not. How cool is that, right? Now, this is about as many as I can get at that 0 price range. Once I start to get 50,000 or 60,000 components into the system, it does tend to get a little bit more exaggerated, and I start to lose frames. But this is a really easy way to do things. Now, I think that what I'm going to have to do is change this secondary debris system just a touch, because it's not perfect, and all we're going to do is adjust it so that it doesn't overlap quite so much with our first debris field. And then we're also going to go ahead and up it to 20,000 rather than 10,000. Robotic says it's awesome. That sounds good. This is what I was wagering would happen. I was like, this game will not work unless I can get GPU instancing to work, but it should be fairly easy. And it turned out it's not only easy, it's way more effective than I thought it would be. So as you can see, what we've got here is a really convincing debris field. I think I can make it even more convincing if I cube rather than square the debris. But watch what happens as we pull away from the field. In a minute here, is it 0.3 that I've got it set to? It might be 0.2. We're now passing 0.3 and... Okay, so it's got to be 0.2. Backing up is quite slow. Beep, beep, beep. This will be something I adjust, so this is just a demonstration of what I built off screen. Once we drop down to 0.2, 3, 2, 1, bonk. See that? So that is just a first take on how I can make this affordable. So what I do is when we get to a fair distance away, I replace the debris with large elements and only 1/10 as many. And there's a little bit of popping going on here, but the point here is that it allows me to have debris fields that don't feel so crunchy. When you see a debris field in the distance in Unity, it renders with this sparkly sub-pixel nonsense that we can't really deal with. And I'm sure there must be some way to deal with it, but it's not a built-in camera effect that I could find. So rather than have sparkly nonsense, I go ahead and change how it appears. But for the moment, that 0.2 was great when we were spherical. It's clear that that's not going to be great for when we are large. So what we're going to do is we're going to make it less than 0.4. And instead of the large radius that we're getting here, we're going to go ahead and reduce this down to a smaller radius, like 3. Now what we also need to do is, yeah, that's fine. We're using the same, we're just using the first 1/10 of our system. But what I'm thinking about doing here is just saying that max equals 1,000. Let's go ahead and see what happens when we just say that we're just going to use the first 1,000, and that's all we need. Because if I can get away with just using 1,000, that would be really nice, because that's just one batch, and that's perfect. So let's go ahead and start reversing and see whether or not we can get that 1,000. So we're at 0.5, 4, and bonk. Okay, so that's a little bit aggressive. All right, so I think that what we'll do is we'll have 1,000 large components and we'll phase between the large and the small. That'll be easy enough, right? So we've got a couple of elements here that we have made just specifically for the sake of LODs. Here we are. And we don't need to have this list anymore because we're just going to have 1,000, always exactly 1,000 of these. And we're going to go ahead and we don't have to worry about this. Just use it here. Index equals this. And so what we're going to do is down here in our display system, we're going to go ahead and render only a portion of our objects as we start to work out this element. So just delete that, and then we'll go over here into LOD objects. There we are. So that should work, except for I need to also mix in some other elements. So we're going to go ahead and make this less than 0.5. And then here we're going to say If percent shown is greater than 0.4f, then we're going to want to do the first 2,000 objects, and so on and so forth. Int find debris batches equals 0, and we say if percent shown is greater than 0.4f, find debris batches equals 3, 4 is fine. If percent shown is greater than 0.3f, else if percent shown, I'm going to say is find debris patches equals 3, else if percent shown is greater than 0.2f, find debris patches equals, like this, 2, else if percent shown is greater than 0.1f, find debris patches equals 1. And then we say the same thing as we did down here, but here's the thing. We want to skip the very first instance, because the very first instance is going to be the one that we've already drawn at 3 times scale. Alboetti says he likes it. That's good to hear. So we're actually going to start at batch 1, because otherwise we would just be drawing small objects inside of the large objects. And then we're going to say A is less than or equal to, no, less than materials, less than mathf dot min, not materials, objs dot length, objs dot count. Let's just go ahead and make it less than or equal to find debris patches. Find debris batches, A++. And then what we'll do is here we'll just say if find debris batches is greater than or equal to objs.count, find debris batches equals objs.count -1. That way we won't ever accidentally try and draw a batch that we don't have if we're doing small batch artisanal debris, you know? Now, with that said, we're going to do this exact same thing that we did before, except that instead of just passing it the name batch, we're going to have to be a little bit more careful. So here we're going to go ahead and make these into B. And then in here, we're going to go ahead and say that rather than passing it batches, we're passing it objs B. That should work. Let's go ahead and give this a little bit of a test run. Why is that red? I suppose we'll find out. Unexpected bracket. How is that an unexpected bracket? Did I accidentally type a curly bracket or something? Oh, there's the unexpected bracket. Here we need to set that up, so it's going to be LOD objs equals new LOD objs 1000. Perfect. And then here we don't have to do this index is less than A bullshit. We can just say A. In fact, there we go. Perfect. Now should we see whether or not this works? Yeah, objs.count. The dot count is a particularly bad thing because it actually takes a considerable amount of processing, and that happens with every single loop. So if you're in a time-sensitive loop like mine, you really can't use objs.count except once. Like, you have to cache it. So here we are about to see it happen. Let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, so you can see that there is definitely some bounce. I think that what might be good is if we kind of segue between the two. We got this percent shown. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and say percent shown times equals 2. And then we're going to want to have a inverted percent shown for how many of these we draw. So we're going to go ahead and say, instead of 1,000, we're going to draw 1 minus percent shown times 1,000. We're going to have to cast that to an int, I can already tell. mathf.seal to int. There we are. And so this will be a number always between 0, and 1. And to double check that, we'll just go ahead and clamp it. There we are. So down here with the find debris patches, what we're going to want to have this be is actually the obj.count -1, because we don't want the first one, times %shown. There we are. So what we'll do is we'll slowly winnow away all of the mathf.floor to int. We'll slowly winnow away all of the find debris while slipping in more and more of the large replacement debris. And that should allow us to have a visual that slowly diminishes and gets less less intensive and less sparkly. Because the sparkling is really the problem. When these things end up only taking up a pixel of space, you get sparkles. And that's just not what I want. Oh man, that looks really good. There's a little bit of popping here and there, but that is hella nice. Yeah, I think I can live with that. Only problem is that %shown is ending up being incorrectly displayed because this is actually a value on the object, not a local variable. So we're going to go ahead and call this effective shown equals %shown times 2 equals this. And then we'll replace all of our references to %shown with effective shown. Good. All right. We're still using a placeholder mesh for our debris, but it almost doesn't matter. The only thing that really matters is that it needs to be primarily pale, like a faded hull color, with a small glow-in-the-dark element to it. And the exact shape is almost irrelevant. Yeah, that's ending up pretty well. Another thing I could do is I could make the first pass not radiate out very much. If the first 1,000 objects stay close to home, popping will be a lot less visible. And it'll also reduce the amount of glitter. Let's go ahead and do that. So up here, we're going to want to be a little bit careful about how this works. So when we get this percentage here, we're going to go ahead and check. If A is less than 1,000, these are LODable objects and should be on the surface. And we'll just say % equals times equals 0.1. All right, so now the first 1,000 elements should be on the surface and only on the surface, which will allow us to have no pop at all, and we'll also have no floating speckled debris. That should all be good, should all work out. Let's try it on for size. And here comes the popping. So you can see that we're losing swaths of sparkles as we back up. But to be honest, I'm okay with that. It's not really very noticeable. I doubt any of you on Twitch could even see it. And what we get instead is a steadily crawling expansion of the scaled up debris at the surface or near the surface of our object. That means, see this sparkle, this subpixel sparkle here? That's pretty bad, and that's sort of what I'm trying to get rid of. We're only at 0.25 from the surface here, so that means that I might have to be a lot more aggressive with my debris culling, because that's some pretty noticeable sparkle going on there. So let's go ahead and we're going to go make this 0.25 instead of 0.1. And we're also going to go ahead and make it so that our sparkling isn't between 0 and 0.5. We want our LOD to be between 0.25 and 0.5. So to do that, we're going to want to do percent shown minus 0.25f times 4. Always between 0 and 1, with the operative range being percent shown 0.25 to 0.5. Oh, that's up. We went down. There we go. Zoom. All right, we're about to enter into our, there we go. Now we're starting to popping. Now we're going to be at 0.31, 0.3, 0.27, and then none left. All right, so that's actually pretty close to what I want. Let's reverse direction and see how it looks as we're coming in. Passable. Very passable. All right, I'm happy with that. Dunk, donk, 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 bonk. All right. So now we have some pretty good debris. Shall we push our luck? Let's delete these other hap core elements. They are invisible. You couldn't see them anyway. Go ahead and apply this one so that it is our prefab. We'll duplicate this and we'll just flip it on the y-axis like so. Then we'll duplicate both of these and flip them on the z-axis, like, oh, sorry, x-axis, like so. And let's just see how much slowdown we get with this much debris. Okay, so we do get some. We're down to 50 frames a second just by raw display purposes here. Did you see that flicker? That was strange. What was that? Yeah, so this many debris elements being shown at once is not doing us any favors. The real problem is a lack of culling. I do some culling, but I don't do enough culling. Oh, there. That. What is that? What is that? Is that a Shadowcaster bug? Is that what it is? Because that was okay. So I paused it. God damn it. I didn't hit shift, so I didn't end up pausing it. I ended up stopping it. Hello? But the problem here is not just that weird flicker. That weird flicker might just be because I'm calling something that doesn't understand. Okay, see that? That's not good. What is that? So we've got this situation where these objects are wrong. There are two possible things it could be. One is that it could simply be that the objects are not being shadowed correctly. Another option is that it could be that their materials are inverted. But I think that this is clearly the problem. You see that? There is some kind of actual thing going on here where the object in that system is not responding correctly. We've got, this is the debris system in question. And if we take a look here, okay, so I have to, there we are. If we take a look, it's not making any obvious difference over on there. There's no Nothing changing on the display on my side, which means that there's something about this that's happening inside of the rendering engine. This is interesting. I don't know what could be causing this because these objects aren't really related. Hold on, I'm going to grab some water. As far as I know, the only thing about these objects that unifies them is that they happen to be drawn at the same time. So what about it would cause them to be drawn like this? And I'm looking, I'm not convinced that this isn't a materials bug, but I don't know what kind of materials bug, why it would reverse the order of the materials or anything. I could switch it out for objects that are all the same material. See whether that helps. Okay, so it's not a materials bug because these have the correct blue parts. But there's like a specific range where they just barf. You see that? And it's all of them. All of them barf in that specific range. Oh, what is going on here? So all of those are correct and all of these are wrong. Huh. This is new. Anyway, the culling is the question here. We don't want to draw more than a certain number of objects, a safe number of objects. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to have some kind of static max object drawing, and that's going to be an option that we can set in our settings menu. So public static int. How big can ints can get real big, right? Yeah. Max batches, and we'll set the max batches equal to 100. Okay, no problem. And then down here in our update, right now each of these gets updated on their own. We're going to want to instead call them from a global static update for a couple of reasons. Yeah, Alboechi says he also thinks it's because I just have too many things in this scene. It's worth actually looking into this a little bit more in detail here. If I were to delete these two objects, one of the things it might be, no, because I'm not using the local scales. I was going to think about whether or not it was like the local scaling that was the issue, but it can't be because the local scaling isn't being applied. Oh, that's really strange. So if I were to take this hab chord and make it positive and it's to just manually move it, do you think we'd have the same problems? Yeah, I can already tell we're having the same problems. Or maybe not. These are not shadow casters. Is it something about scaling the objects negatively? That doesn't make any sense to me because these don't inherit any of their parents' scaling. There's no Unity transform parenting going on here. I'm just giving them a raw value. So I don't know why the parent's scale would affect that. If the parent scale is what's causing these issues, I need to fix that nowish. Seriously? No problems with it here? How could it be the parent's scale? That doesn't make any sense. The only thing that's related to the parent's scale is the starting position of the debris. It has nothing to do with their... Interesting. Ilbochi says, is it possible to send debris that's caught up in the engine exhaust trail flying away? I think that could be a fun effect. Yeah, it is possible. I just have to think about the best way to check for it on the cheap. Something tucked far away in my brain. It might actually be the parent scale due to weird graphics reasons, but I don't know. Yeah, the thing is that the parent's scale, unless it's the backdrop that matters, because the individual objects, they shouldn't be related to the scale at all. I'm passing their matrices, and the matrices have no relation to the parent matrix. Oh, how is that possible? Is it seriously the parent scale? How does this even work? It's definitely the parent scale. So there aren't really very many things I do with scale here. Let's just do one more test. That looks like it's damaged, doesn't it? That looks like damage. So it might not be scale, it might be something else. Unless those are in the shadow of something else. Are those legit shadowed? I bet those are just legit shadowed and I'm an idiot. Yeah, they're just legit shadowed. In fact, those aren't even the same mesh. We're getting into the old school particle systems that I was using to test some stuff a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Okay, so just so that we're clear, the way that I'm doing the actual display here is I'm creating a matrix 4x4 TRS, which is just basically a transform. And I'm using the position, the rotation, and the scale that I create. Here's the thing. The scale is vector 3.1 times a scale, like a positive number. So the scale can never be negative unless you've created a min scale of -3 or something for some reason. So I'm not capable of passing it the parent's offset. I'm not capable of passing it the parent scale. Now, I do know that I had problems with scaling when I was doing it using parenting, but the whole point of this is I'm not using parenting. What I can do, however, is invert the scale on these two debris systems and just see whether or not that changes anything. Yeah, robotic sarcasm, there is definitely scaling stuff that breaks batching, but only when the batched objects have those scales, not when when unrelated objects have those scales. Well, I can clearly see that inverting the scaling on the objects didn't help at all. This is really strange. Is it seriously that if there is a mirrored object anywhere, they screw up? Is that what's going on here? If I invert this on all 3 axes, and then rotate it back into position, what the heck? Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, it's definitely the scaling. I just don't have any idea. Because, I mean, that was breaking even when I didn't have any of the debris objects. So if I delete these 2 debris objects, Now we've only got debris objects on the unscaled object, right? Oh my god. If there is any badly scaled object in the scene, this breaks. Is that seriously true? Is that honestly what's going on here? Because that is ridiculous. Now, one thing I am doing is I am posting this in update. These are just getting pushed to the GPU during update, so that might not be the right time to do it. It might be better off as an earlier late update, for example. But I'm not getting that problem now, even though I've got twice as many particles, because I'm not scaling something. Holy shit! That is friggin' weird, guys. It looks like, as far as I can tell, I am hesitant to even believe this. If there is any object on the Z-stack that has a negative scale, it screws up the drawing, the shadowing of all of the other objects that get done afterwards. It might be because they share a material and there's something screwy going on with the materials. You think that's it? Well, the material in question here is, in fact, particle debris. So these are the same materials that we're running with the debris system. These are particle debris glass and particle debris solid, whereas this is particles debris glass. I could change out this particle debris glass for something else. I don't think I have a prox glass because it never came up. We'll go ahead and call it a prox interior just to have it as something else for a moment. And I don't believe there are any particle effects on these. These are all default material. That's brilliant. So if I now duplicate this and make it -30, are we going to have the same problem? Elboetchi asks me, oh my gosh, we do. We have the same problem. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and delete this one. And we're going to add in a big box. 3D object cube. 100 by 100 by 100. No, 500 by 500 by 500. 500 by -500 by 500. That's even not big enough. So 2000 by -2000 by 2000. There we are. And we'll just drop that in. And it could be just that this scale is too large. This is actually, I didn't realize it wasn't anywhere near where I was trying to go, so it's much too large now. 500 is probably right after all. So we're going to drop this into the Z-stack. And all it is a default cube that's been inverted. All right, so that definitely screwed up. Was it because of the cube? Let's uninvert the cube and find out. Are you fucking serious? I literally can't believe this. This is such a weird situation. I wouldn't even know how to report this bug to Unity. Robotic Sarcasm and Elboetchi are both just as incredulous as me. If either of you have any ideas as to what it could be instead, feel free to chime right in. Because I would really like to be able to change the scale of these objects, because the whole point is these things can be swapped, X and Y axes, and be put on ships in different orientations. And if I can't invert the scale, then I have to have a different mesh for every orientation of the ship. Is the default particle shader, is that set up to do batching? No, it's not. Do you think it's the reflections? No, it couldn't be the reflections, right? Oh, I can't disable it because it's default material. Oh, wow. Robotic Sarcasm says it's probably got something to do with the batching. I agree. I just can't figure out what the heck to do about it. The only thing I can really do is maybe change exactly when I load this shit into the GPU. Right now I do it during update. I could just try it during late update and see whether or not that changes anything. So let's invert this cube. Oh, nope, didn't help. It's definitely the negative scale, somehow. That is so friggin' weird. Oh, I'm gonna have to have 4 versions of every single module. It kinda puts a cramp in my style. How can I even tell someone at Unity that this bug is happening? Because this is, how do I describe it? If you are doing instanced draw calls directly into Unity, and there is an object with a negative scale in the background, then lighting stops working. Fucking weird. Elboechi, you are right. That should be how it works, which is why I am so confused as to why this is even a thing. It feels like it might be a bug in their rendering stack. So if I remove it from the Z-axis, there's no errors. If it's not in the Z, in the same Z stack, there are no errors. But if I rotate our ship and make it so that I can see it again, where is it? Oh, there it is. Can I get the Z errors to come back? Is it only if they're within a specific range? That's what I'm trying to figure out, Elboechi. Robotic Sarcasm says any negative scaling on any object fucks up lighting, but that's not entirely true, because it didn't fuck it up when it was at range. It only fucked it up when it was in the view. Yeah. But only when it was nearby in the view, not when it was like 100 meters away. Negatively scaled objects emit a short-range halo of making shit stop working. Could it have something to do with shadow receiving? Well, my objects they are set to receive shadows. Why don't I go ahead and disable that temporarily? Let's put that object back where we knew it was going to break stuff. And I will just temporarily set it to never have shadow casting, just to see. Currently equals false. Oh, you know what? That actually might be it. No, because we were well within range. We weren't anywhere near range, so that's fine. You think maybe that the negative scale is casting shadows on a negative axis? Huh. Well, it's certainly not my fault. I turned off their ability to receive shadows, and it remained broken. So right now, these particles are not receiving shadows. That is to say, they are unlit, aside from just the direct sunlight. But they're still falling into darkness like that. You see how that crawls in? What a strange situation that is. But if I take this shadow and I tell this shadow to stop casting shadows, nope, even if I tell the cube to stop casting shadows, you still get the problem. Elbowitch and Robotic Sarcasm are trying their best to help out, but I honestly have no idea what's going on. In order to even report this bug, I'd have to create a new project just to hammer out what the heck is going on. Another option is it could be I'm using multiple materials, and in theory that could be an issue, but it would be dumb if it was. So right now we should just have some weird looking floaty particle bits. Yeah, that's fine. This is an unlit material. So you're not going to be able to even tell whether or not this is working or not. Yeah, that's the wrong material to have gotten rid of. X Sarden says, what if I change the material of the cube? I'll take a look into that in a second. So wait, yep, that's still broken. So even if I'm only using one material, I still have the same issue on the particles. If I change the cube's material from default material to, I don't give a shit, Sprite's mask. Well, when it's invisible, it's not causing us any problems. Let's switch it over to the particle system here. That's also fine. You know, if it's just the default material that's fucking things up, that's fine. I can do without the default material, let me tell you. Let's go ahead and set it up as as one of our actual prox materials here. Prox highlight. That'll do. So now it is not a default material. Let's see whether or not we get the same problem. There are several materials that are in the cluster that are default. If I change all of them over to non-default, that might help. So this is prox interior and this is default. So if I take all of these plates and switch them over to prox hull, which is what I wanted to do anyway, I just forgot to. And then we're going to just temporarily get rid of this cube, duplicate this hab chord, invert it on the axis in question, hit play. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, so the question is there something in here that's still taking the default materials? No. So I don't know whether or not it is a problem with the default materials specifically, but I do know that switching away from the default materials doesn't entirely save us. If we switch this over to prox hull, will we still have that problem? Okay, so prox hull causes it. And prox highlight does not. The difference between prox highlight and prox cull is that prox highlight has no metallicity, whereas prox hull has no metallicity. Was that a 0 before? I think it was a 0 before. They have the same smoothness. Neither of them has a texture. What about prox debris? That's also safe. I'm getting the feeling that the problem is if I reuse a material on an object that has a substantial positive scale as well, it barfs. Because I mean, prox hull is shared by nearly every component on the destroyed habitation sector, but the other ones are only on small parts of the destroyed habitation sector. And the main the main whole color, the main whole thing is shared by numerous background effects, so that might be it. Well, let's go ahead and switch it over to Viking, which is just a random material that I've never used or seen before. I think it comes with Unity's default character thing. Viking is not a problem. So really, it's only the prox hull and the default material. What if we do a particle effect hull? Prox debris doesn't have instancing, prox hull did. Oh, that might be exactly what the problem is. Instancing with a negative value. Of course, of course. Whew. I think you've solved the issue. So if I switch this over from particle debris solid back to prox hull and turn off instancing. You don't have instancing on anymore. You shouldn't be causing us problems anymore. Okay. So, El Boechi says, to summarize the rendering of the debris system borks as soon as there is a completely unrelated object with a certain material at a certain distance with a negative scale. Yes, that is true. Robotic Sarcasm says, prox debris doesn't have interesting, but prox hull did. I've just disabled the instancing on prox hull. But you're right, prox highlight also didn't have any, and that worked fine. But the default material didn't have any. But it didn't have anything to batch with. It could be that turning off the batching doesn't take for some reason, like it needs to think for a while. It would make 100% sense if it was a batching glitch due to a material with batching turned on trying to combine a positive and a negative scale, because that's actually an issue that's known. But I've never seen it affect another object. That's friggin' weird, right? So we're going to go ahead and take a look at everybody's favorite, the frame debugger. Pinkhair just stopped in. We're having a lot of fun here, Pinkhair. It says, okay, hold on. Can you guys still see me? Because I'm just getting a network error display. I'm not actually seeing any values here. Oh, I bet it's because I turned my frame debugger on. All right, so if we take a look here in the frame debugger, what we're looking for is this draw meshed instance stuff. And I don't know if I can pull it so that it's visible on frame with the frame as well. Here we are. So here you can see these draw mesh instanced. These are the calls that are being corrupted. but above that is just the ship. These things get called before the negative scale object gets drawn. And there's the negative scale object right there. Zoom. Okay, hold on. So now it's getting into the lighting. Oh gosh, that looks really cool, doesn't it? So they're building the light maps. This is all fine, all well and good. Yeah, there's no problems here. Oh, there we are. But you can see that we don't end up with any lighting on the particles. Some of them are lit and some of them aren't. See that? It's just like magically, lighting is only applied to some of them. I can't even spot where the lighting goes wrong. All of these steps looked correct. It could be a problem with HX lighting interfering with the standard process. Let's go ahead and turn off our HX lighting for a second, just to see whether or not that is the issue. If we take a look at our camera, which is here, we have an HX volumetric lighting object. If we turn that off, we can no longer see any volumetric lighting. Now if we hit play, are we going to see the same problem? I literally can't see anything on my chat anymore. So guys, let me know if I go dead all of a sudden. Alright, so even with HX volumetric lighting off, we still get the same problem. So this is not an HX issue. It's not an issue of instancing being turned on or turned off. It might be maybe the render queue is screwed up. What if we change the render to 2010? Oh, oh, it's magic. You know. Fuck. This makes no fucking sense. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but I changed the priority in the render queue just a tiny itsy bitsy bit, and all of a sudden it works. I'd like to pretend that this is just luck, and like it's working just because at random chance I'm not driving in exactly the same way, but it was pretty reliable before and I can't get it to error out anymore. So literally, if I have a scaled object, I have to put it at a different point in the render queue in order to make it run correctly. Anyway, I'm going to turn on Proxhull as instantiated again, just because there's a lot of Proxhull elements and they often repeat. So let's just go ahead and see whether or not that causes us any issues. Alright, so that seems to work. Now the advice I'm getting is to put it back on 2000 and see whether or not it breaks. Pink hair, if you keep an eye on the screen now, you will see what goes horribly wrong. Yep, there it is. Fuck me. What the fuck is this bug? Oh my god, this makes no damn sense. I don't even know how to X Sarden, you were extremely helpful, even though you were only here briefly, so thank you. Alboetcher says, do I have to put every single scaled object to its own point in the render queue? No, I only have to put the materials that are going to be mirrored on their own render queue. So if I grab this HAB core and flip it over by -30, the same material is being used. It's still 2001, so it should still work. Because this is a material-based bug, not an object-based bug. But that didn't work. That broke. So the question is, what's going on with this that needs to be fixed? And one of the things it could be is any of these other debris, any of these other materials that got mirrored. And that's the core issue here is, I'm going to have to change every material so that it's either mirror safe or not mirror safe based on the render queue priorities. So now all of the mirrored materials have been put 1 point further down the render queue than the debris materials. And you can see the debris materials are rendering fine. And there's no damage done to the frame rate or anything for having that set up the way it is. Alboetchi says, this is so dumb. Alboetchi, it is so dumb that I would not have been able to invent it. This is a really weird bug. So how do I report this to Unity? If a material is on an object with a negative scale, and it's at the same point in the render queue priority system as a instanced material, a different instance material, then the objects drawn with a different instance material are not lit correctly. What? I'm sure they want to watch my 2-hour video on trying to make debris work in order to get their bug reports. Yeah, the thing is, robotic sarcasm, if I walked up to the dudes doing the graphics programming at Unity and said, what the fuck? They would say, yep. It's not like that's something they disagree with. It's just so bizarre. Wow, that was quite an adventure, you guys. Thanks for being there with me, because I went insane either way, but it would have been a lot harder to get through it if I hadn't had somebody getting along with me and being like, I also don't understand this. This is also nonsense. Yep. So right now we're running at 55, 60 frames a second, thereabouts. We are in a very heavy debris field, though, as in these debris, there's like 10,000, 10,000, 10,000, no, 10,000, 20,000. So it's 60,000 objects, each of which requires 2 distinct batches due to them having 2 different materials. So that's 120,000 objects being drawn down there. And that's why our frame rate is so low. I mean, our frame rate is a mere 70 frames a second, guys. It actually drops a little bit lower than that when we get a little bit closer, because we're already pulling out into LOD range, which rapidly reduces the number of drawn objects. How nice is that, right? So it drops down to like 55 when we get close enough that all of the objects are being drawn. But as we back up and we start to lose lose objects to the LOD system, you can see that our frame rate pops right back up to 70. Tenchaos1 says, what's the FPS in the build? I actually don't know how to check that very easily. I can tell whether it's running really badly or not, but I don't have any built-in FPS checker for our for the loose build. I could put one in, I suppose. What we're going to do now is we're going to change this to 0.5, because at 0.25 it's a little bit too flat. Sarden says it's definitely running better than COD, and Robotic Sarcasm says saved by batching number is delicious. Yeah, I love it when the saved by batching number is 3 digits more than the number of batches. But it does drop down to like 50 FPS if we are just going to plow into 120 objects. Now, what I can do is I can fix these objects up to have an emissive section, so that when we are close, we get the glow in the dark that I need. But I can do it without having two materials, because there's no reason to have a separate emissive material. I might as well just have a material that has an emissive component. And I could do that with a variety of ways. One of the ways I could easily do it is using a color on the verts. I could paint the mesh with a color that is emissive. That's relatively straightforward. Yeah, the 4 each versus 4 guys, there are some reasons I actually do care which ones you use sometimes, but they're not performance related. Cody1712 says hi. You missed quite an adventure, Cody. Quite an adventure. Wah! Let's go down into the dark and see how they look. Glowing in the dark. I'm pretty sure that I could optimize this even further. But you can see they're not really very dark. They're pretty bright in the shadows here. Did I set the shadows up to be bright? Because, I mean, even the main material is glowing in the dark. I mean, these shadows look pretty black on other objects. Maybe the prox material isn't... Don't open, just stop running. Is the prox material not getting properly shadowed for some reason? I mean, not the prox material, the particle material. If we take a look, the particle debris solid material is something that we would like to have actually work. We want it to be dark when it's supposed to be dark. Now here's the issue. It might be because of the render queue. If I render it at a different time, it might be that it doesn't get into the light map until after it's already been rendered. So I'm going to punch the scale here to a little bit higher. We're going to put it after our friends in the render queue. And we're going to see what happens. I already saw it flip out, so I'm pretty sure that this has rebroken it. Cody says that he's always a little too late. That's okay. We've still got another half hour or so. And I'm showing you the bug right now, just in case you wanted to see it. Now here's the problem. Is it actually just like inverting all the normals? Is that what it is? Because that would be equally silly, but it would at least make sense with the scaling, you know? So what I'm just trying to check out here is how dark the shadows get. And it looks like there's no change. The shadows are still quite bright here. So that means that there's something wrong with how this is displaying shadows, and it's got nothing to do with the render queue. So what sort of nonsense is causing it to glow quite so brightly? Now I do have the distance fade being white. If I were to change that to black... Ardinius says hi, and Robotic Sarcasm says, I don't think that Unity does the normal inverting. Yeah, I don't think it does it on purpose. The question is whether it does it on accident. Because an inverted normal would make a whole lot more sense than a shadow that gets broadcast backwards. So if there's just something wrong with how the normals are being calculated, that, you know, is something I can at least understand. So I've just made the distance fade black just to see whether or not that was a factor, and it clearly is not. These are still being quite brightly lit in shadow. Are they not receiving shadows? Did I forget to turn the shadows back on? Is that what the problem is? Because that would make sense, I guess. But now that I've turned them to being black at distance, when we back up, let me just show you how that looks. Basically, the way I was going to try and get rid of sparkles initially is I was going to paint them black. So you can see that they are just going dark as we back up and becoming just like points of darkness. And that's kind of the point. If you get far enough away, they just become pitch black little dots. But I don't need that anymore. In fact, I could probably take it out of the shader entirely, but that wouldn't help the fact that they are not getting properly shadowed. So down here is where I do our shadow stuff. And we do shadow, currently drawing shadows equals camera transform position minus our transform position dot magnitude is less than quality settings shadow distance minus radius. So that should be correct. If we select it and hit play, it'll actually tell us whether it's drawing shadows. It's that last dot. So right now it's not currently drawing the shadows. And what we're going to do is we're going to go plunge over the top until we can see them. And then we're going to see whether or not shadows are getting drawn. Because I think maybe I just misunderstood the ranges involved. Because it's still currently not drawing shadows. So the problem is that they're not drawing shadows, and that's why the shadows aren't getting drawn. There's just some logic wrong with my draw shadows thing here. One of the things it might be is that this might not actually be getting called. It might be that... Oh, I can check that too. Actually, stop. I'm going to pull this over a little bit because it's an annoyingly long way to walk every single time I want to check something. Just grab it and pull it over there. All right, here we are. So we are now deep into this shadowed region, and if I select this, you can see that it says it's currently drawing the shadows. But that doesn't look like it's properly drawing the shadows, does it? Is that true for all of them? Are they all currently drawing the shadows? No. This one is not currently drawing shadows. Are all of these from that one? That doesn't make any sense. Let's go ahead and make the shadow drawing a lot more forgiving. And we'll just have it always be true. Now the reason why that's going to be okay is because at a percent shown of less than 0.5, we just turn shadow casting or shadowing off in general. Okay, so all of these shadows are currently being drawn, but it's not dark. These shadows are not as dark as they should be. I mean, I can look in the lighting tab just to double check, but I'm pretty sure that our lighting is set pretty dark. Environment reflections, skybox, intensity multiplier, real-time global, mixed lighting, light mapper, ambient occlusion. That would be fun. Fog, spot cookie. Okay, so I actually don't see where the... I guess it's the intensity multiplier here. You see that? That should be it, right? Well, one of the things it could be is the material in question. Maybe it is a material that's got some metallicity or smoothness to it, and maybe that's screwing it up. Let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, so that was the problem. It looks like the metallicity was the problem. It was trying to reflect the sky. And because I don't have a sky, it was reflecting Unity's neutral bright gray sky. So metallicity was really screwing up. I may add metallicity back in later if it turns out that I actually have a sky I would like to reflect. but for the moment it's fine without that. We'll just turn down the metallicity here as well, although that might be what caused this to glow in the dark. It was. Okay. So basically the thing here is that this metallicity is basically a glow-in-the-dark element. It's just a magic glow-in-the-dark feature. And what I'm going to want to do is replace this with a singular material. And that's the key here. Right now I'm drawing all of this stuff with 2 materials, and what I'm going to be doing instead is drawing it with just 1. And I'll have an emission map. I'll use the color of the mesh verts as an emissive guide, and I'll have it properly glow in the dark instead of reflecting a sky that I'm going to be replacing anyway. Ardinuous says, I came across your combining meshes tutorial and just watched your GPU instancing tutorial, and you seem to be able to interact with real-time and physics. Ardinuous is asking me how I'm doing this, and I guess I should go ahead and describe it. Pencare says I should add a skybox, and yes, I should. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. I have a bunch of your skyboxes still on the other project, but this is just my garden level where I work things out, and I forgot that metallicity uses that damn color. So let me go ahead and show you what I'm doing here, explain it to you, and I guess if you're watching this on YouTube later on, you might also get a kick out of this. All of these objects are being drawn with a function called draw mesh instances, or mesh instanced. They do not exist in Unity. So the question is, not only how do I draw all of them, but how do I do things like bump them? So all of these objects are physics enabled. And how do I do that? Well, the answer is that the one object I have that puts all of these into the game world has a big long list of positions and rotations and scales. I'll show you that. Here it is. So I've got this list of positions, rotations, and scales. What I do is I translate that into the matrices that are required to draw the objects. So in the end, what happens is I have to pass these matrix 4x4s that tell Unity, or tell the graphics card, exactly where to draw each of these objects. But I keep them saved separately as well, so that I can modify them as I need to. And that's precisely what I do. I do a very quick test against every single position that's within range, and if the position is within the collision scope of a small ball that I put at the front of the ship, I push it away. And I push it away using a method that's... man, that siren is loud as hell. I don't know if you can hear that, but I can't even think through it. Could you stop sirening? Thank you. So basically I use this dictionary here to keep track of which objects are moving in which direction. And then I basically just winnow them down, you know, with every frame I move everything that's labeled as being moved, and then I refresh those specific matrix 4x4s. It's fairly straightforward. It's not as complicated as it sounds, but basically I'm not using Unity's built-in physics system. I couldn't, because none of these are game objects. They're all fake. Plus side is, it's super fast in comparison to Unity's stuff. Well, apparently there is some kind of horrible disaster happening 3 feet from my house, because that is the 3rd siren in the past 5 seconds. Here comes number 4. Push, push, push. Push, push. Push, push, push. All right, well, what I want to do is I have to modify some of these shaders that we're working with to be a little bit better. And one of the things we need to do is actually go back out into our project and create a painted mesh for our debris. So right now we've got a couple of random things, right? No biggie. Let's move some of these out of the way. The object we're actually rendering is this guy here. But that's not really the shape of object I want. So we're going to create a new object for our debris. Ardinia says, thank you for the quick answer on that. Are you doing anything to test physics interactions between each mesh? Or are you only concerned with the space mesh, or the spaceship mesh? Yeah, so I have just one. I can't. That would to have every single one of those pieces of debris check against every single other piece of debris would be very expensive. So it's just the spaceship. There's a small ball, invisible ball, on the nose of the spaceship, and that's the only thing that checks for colliders. Later on, I'll probably add some colliders to the engines that will actually push debris away from you when you're accelerating. But for now, it's just the one at the nose of the ship. And because it's just that one collider and it only checks against things that are relatively close, it's fairly fast. It's fast enough that it's not a factor. It's not slowing down the game at all. Pink Air says the instance physics is looking pretty fantastic for that purpose. I might add some rotation in there. It actually is not that hard, but I think I'm going to wait on that for a little while, just until I think about it a little bit more. So what I need here is an object that is a similar shape to the one I've got now, but doesn't look so oddly specific. When you're using something 100,000 times, it has to look generic so that you don't notice that it's being used 100,000 times. And unfortunately, the desk thing I've got is a little bit too obvious. The basic setup is that you're going to want to have something that has a couple of different shapes depending on the angle you view it at. More damn sirens. Oh, it was really loud. Okay. So we hit W and then hit bevel, and then we're going to do a lot of a bevel here, and then we're going to go ahead and just create one little face blop like that. And we're going to try and create a distinctive shape from every angle. So we're going to go and do a knife cut through this object like so. And then we're going to delete these guys out here. Boom. Boom. And then we'll just go in and fill these faces in. Like that. That might not actually be enough. So let's grab this dented face and look at it from above, and then Control-Alt-Shift-S to scale it a little bit more. And then what we'll do is we'll pull this up. And that'll give it a nice, unique shape, right? And then down here, we're going to want to have something that comes off of our object. So we're just going to add in a small circle with 8. And then we'll scale it down. Is this its own object? It was. Join those together. Grab this, pull it over. And basically, we're going to do that leg thing again, but on a completely different scale. So we'll extrude this down slightly and just shoop. And then we'll fill that face in. I think that's all we need to do. Excuse me. Pink Hair says you could deform the piece in the shader if you could pass the instance ID. Yeah, I can actually pass it the instance ID, but I don't think that I want to make the shading expensive. I might look into that later, though. Robot Sarcasm says he sees an N gun because I wasn't paying attention, and he's 100% right. It wouldn't actually matter. Unity converts all of that stuff into triangles anyway, but Unity tends to barf, and sometimes we'll convert them into nonsense triangles that don't work out, so we might as well go ahead and turn them into proper polygons that are 4 or 3 sided. Pink Hair says it's weird. It is weird watching you fill holes that way. In the software he uses, point order determines normal direction. That's actually something I have gotten used to with Blender, and I actually like quite a bit. Not having to worry about that. Blender does have a couple of other problems with normal directions being obnoxious, though, so it's not always a win. What we're going to do now is switch over into Vertex Paint mode, and we're going to paint it black. Because that's going to be our emission color, and we don't want any emission except for certain positions. So we're going to switch over to white. Change the radius way down, and we're going to want to paint specific things as glowy elements. And I think what we're going to want to paint as a glowy element is this particular edge here. But you see how it's got vertex color, which means that there's not really an edge there. It is, in fact, going to try to set us up with an absolute rather than... sorry, what I'm trying to say is I can't make it have an edge just because of the way that vertex painting works. So we've got to split the verts there. The best way to do this is probably to actually just split them. Let's grab it and split them. No reason to go all the way around trying to figure stuff out when we can just V and pull it down. This will also be handy for the sake of... yeah, what's going on here? Oh. This will also be handy for the sake of painting. It's a little bit easier to paint like this. And we'll do the same here. Yeah, I don't have any problems with choosing the direction I'm supposed to be having my normals face either, but it's so much easier when they're just right. And it's like, whatever, man. You don't have to worry about it. Alright, so this is what we're going to paint. Switch back into paint mode here and paint it white. Oh, I caught some of the rest of our mesh there. I'm not 100% sure that this is actually what we want to have painted white, but it should be distinctive enough, at least for our first purpose here. So we'll just go ahead and put this whole system back together. Doop. And doop. There we go. There is our painted mesh. And we're going to want to name it something. Like, we're going to call these DPs for paint, or PDs for painted debris. Deskish. And save it. Pop on over into Unity. That'll take a second to load in. And now we're going to want to drop that new mesh into our scene so that we can edit it a little bit. Now we have a pretty crowded scene at this point, just because we've been throwing things around willy-nilly. Just grab these cores and move them away just so that we can have a little bit of space to work with. And we should have... oh, that's not the right thing. There we are. Where are you? There, shift, there. We should have something in front of the ship that we can just adjust. Here it is. That's a radar marker. That is not what I want to adjust. You are wrong. How do I turn off the UI? There used to be a way to turn off the UI... like entirely. Just stop showing that layer. Oh, I can't remember how to do it. That radar marker is actually not a radar marker we need anyway. We'll just delete it. Debris furniture. Let's move it away just so that we won't have that problem again. And we'll go ahead and change out the debris for a DP debris, which is... Why isn't it here? Oh, because it's PD debris. There we are. There it is. So this is going to be our new piece of debris. We're not needing 2 materials. We only need 1, and we're going to make it the Prox Debris Solid material. This Prox Debris Solid material has a lot of wasted space in it. So we're going to want to create a new object here. This debris shader, we'll duplicate it and then have this just be a backup later on because I'm not using proper control for these debris, for these shaders. But it doesn't really bother me too much. We'll deal with it. And then this guy we'll hack apart. And we'll delete the other one as soon as we're done. This is actually an annoying habit I got into back when I was doing tutorials, since it takes so long to restore from backup between takes of a tutorial. It is definitely not the recommended thing. You should just use actual version control for controlling your versions. Right, so what we need to do is get rid of the fade color and fade range. Those no longer matter. And that'll give us some barfing here because we are trying to use it at the moment. So here it is. C.lerp fade color, blah, 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 blah. Get rid of that. So here we have our lerp between black and the world highlight color based on how solid it is. That's our scanning setup, or our collider, you know, the glowing ball that tells us when we're going to slam into something. What we need to do is have that black be our vertex color instead. Here's the problem. Vertex color is not one of the things you get in a surface shader. So what we need to do is actually have our vert thing here give us the color of the vertex. Ardinius asks if I have a Patreon or email address. I do have email addresses. He has a question regarding thoughts of rendering forests with hundreds of thousands of trees, but they have to be interactable by NPCs. That's not too hard, as long as your trees always look the same, because you can use mesh instancing only on identical meshes. Now, having your NPCs interact with them would require you to keep track of where all those trees are, but that's pretty straightforward. Honestly, you should just be able to put those trees into the game world as game objects. And Ardinius says, combine the meshes of all the trees and disable their geo. Now, if all of the trees are the same mesh, just use instancing. It's very straightforward. You just check the checkbox that says to turn it on, and it turns it on. There shouldn't be any restrictions on what you can do with those trees as long as they have the exact same meshes. It doesn't, by the way, it can't be a skinned mesh. It has to be an old school mesh. Skinned meshes don't combine with instancing. Ah, yes, I need to pass myself the vertex color. This cam range is not necessary because we're no longer actually using that. But we're going to be using this same vert thing to set up our range. Sorry, not a range, our vertex color. I just have to remember how to do it. Pinkhair says, doesn't have to be quite the same shape because you can use vertex deformation. Yeah, if you write your own shaders, you can change the shape using shader logic. But you can't have that be part of the mesh. The mesh is literally going to be the same mesh. That's the point of GPU instancing. You don't actually send the mesh data over more than once. You send it over once at the beginning, and everything else is just the matrix position and any sort of secondary add-ons that you'd like to send over. That's the savings. The savings is that you don't send over any sort of mesh information. But vertex shaders, I think that I get the color here. Is this where I get the color? No, that's reflectivity. I can't remember the line of code required to load up the color of a vert. Pinker says you could use their world position as a seed for deformation, since every tree could then be unique. That's actually a pretty good idea if he can write shader code. So we'll just go in here and say shader vertex color. How do I get a vertex color? No, that's not how you spell float. Can I just do this? Is this where I can do this without any sort of need for anything else to happen? I think that might be enough. Are you going to barf at me because of an invalid tag? No, I think you might like that. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and use the input color. And we'll do that right here instead of black. It'll be in.color. Ah, look at that. It's glowing in the dark. That was easy. All right. So now we have that all working out. We no longer need that black. So we're going to delete it. Good. Looks like everything is running just fine. And what I can do is I can replace all of my... Oh, what's going on here? That was strange. Somehow it zoomed in funny. We can replace all of my debris system meshes with my new favorite mesh. So we'll just grab these guys, debris system here and here. Particle debris is just one, and it's going to be debris solid. And we're going to want to switch out busted desk A for PD deskish. And that should have worked in both. Yeah. And we will go ahead and change the material on these interior plates. Prox interior is the debris shader, and it doesn't... The reason I did that was so that it would fade out in the distance. And I really don't need that as far as I know anymore. So we're going to switch that over to the standard custom coord shader. But I might actually be better off using that. The custom fade is really nice. It's cheap. Oh, there you are. Well, you can tell which side I forgot to actually update. Let's go ahead and hit apply. And that should update it on the other side as well. Whoa. You know what? Let's just delete this guy. Duplicate this guy. Oh, I just damaged my keyboard. That's not great. I guess I'll have to buy a new keyboard. Whoa! See that flash? Well, this is the bug we were having earlier that I thought I fixed. The good news is the glowing in the dark works fine. The bad news is whatever bug I fixed, I unfixed. There's the problem. When I changed which shader it was using, it changed the render queue. So here we are outside of shadow range, and this is the problem. When you're outside of shadow range, the debris don't get shadowed properly. As we approach, we will see them go dark as the shadow range gets crossed. We'll probably see some FPS loss. Well, whatever. Wow, this is dense. Look at this. So, I think I want that debris distance code back in our setup. So I'm going to go back into this backup debris shader and just recover the elements I need. And that'll be cam range, which we'll grab here and put in here. And we're going to go ahead and put that lerp with the fade color back in. But what we're also going to want to do is have it fade out a second time, and that would be for the emission shader. We'll hard code that though. There's no reason to have that be adjusted. Well, I guess we do want it adjustable as well, so And then we'll have max emission range. Range 0, 1000 equals 50.0. And then we'll want to put all of those back in as here. Boom, and half max emission range. Pink Hair says it looks pretty fantastic. I'm working on making it look as fantastic as possible, so it's got a little bit more work to do here before I feel happy with it. But basically what we're going to want to do is have this emission be lerped between, I guess we do need that black back. Unless I want to define this for every point, and that sounds like annoying, so we're going to put that back in there. And what we'll do is down here, we will go ahead and I guess what we need is not a black. What did I lerp between? I did lerp between black because it's emission. That's right. So what we actually need to do is lerp between a couple of values here. We're going to lerp inside of this between the in.color and black. Underscore black. None more black. And we're going to do this exact same thing here with the in.cam range. But instead of being minus fade range, it's going to be minus max emission range. Now, I don't like dividing. That's the problem, but that's okay. We'll deal with that later. Robot Sarcasm says I should just go for glow-in-the-dark everything. I have plans for what glowing means and what darkness means in this game, so I can't just willy-nilly do that stuff. So let's go ahead and, once again, we're going to switch back this interior plate to our debris shader again. And the reason for that is because we're going to want to have that fade to black as you pull away. And as you get close, we'll want it to show. Now what we want is this emission fade range should be equal to our shadow range, and that's fine. It could even be longer than that if we needed it to be. But what we're going to want to do next is change nothing. All of the other ones' defaults have been set up correctly. Robotic Sarcasm says that glow-in-the-dark beats actual game design any old day. I'm not sure I disagree. I don't think that these are properly fading to black. That doesn't look... I guess it is black. Why is it in front of my... What? It's in front of my rings. That's new, right? It wasn't in front of my rings before. And again, it's not shadowed correctly. Look at how not black some of these are. Well, the idea here is that it'll only glow in the dark nearby, and that way you'll get a good effect, rather than that weird pixely strands of glow that we had before in the distance. We now just have a solid mass of debris, but the debris isn't being shaded to 100% black. It is just not. Is it because the distance fade color is white, like an idiot? Robot Sarcasm says it gets rendered later due to the render queue stuff, but the render queue stuff... Okay, so here's the thing. These are not in the geometry queue. If we take a look at them, what we get is a... There we go. These actually use a material called a particles additive material, which happens at the render queue of 3000 rather than 2000, right? On the other hand, the particles should be at 2000? 2000. So I'm not sure why they would be rendered late, except for I am delivering them in the middle of the update chain. And they might be being drawn not at the rendering time that they're supposed to be drawn. I actually don't know if there is a function for sending them over at a different time. But because it's particles additive, I think what's happening is that the hard particles... Let's try this out. I think that the hard particles rating is what's screwing this up. He says, don't I use late update? I've used both just to test it out, but I switched it back to update since it didn't seem to make any difference. So what we want to do here is find our particles additive material. Yoink. There it is. And then what we're going to want to do is just see whether or not adjusting any of these values. No, it's clearly being rendered just 100% in front. See how in front that is? It's not like a soft particles issue. It's just flat out in front. Okay, so actually if I do it as a maximum soft particles, it's a different value, but it's still pretty screwed up. I can change it from particles additive to something like particles alpha blended, and that actually fixes it, except that it's really heavy. It's totally opaque at this point. So it's the opacity that's getting screwed up here. Well, for now, let's go ahead and switch it over to alpha blended, just because otherwise it's really, really weird. Now, the problem with alpha blended is, of course, that it is a specific density, and I don't believe the tint color affects it. Yeah, you can see that it's, well, it's actually tinted okay. So if I were to reduce the opacity of the tint, I bet it would look okay. I don't know enough about the Unity's internal render queue to know if there is a better place to put those objects. You know, to draw them out like on frame begin or something. I just don't know anything about how that works. Okay, so that didn't help at all. Let's take a look. Unity, what do you call it? Functions on when to call draw mesh instanced. System info.supports instancing. Let me go ahead and put that in here just so that we have it somewhere. Universe, there it is. If, well, thank you for not actually copying when I tell you to copy. Oh, good. It's not working anymore. System info dot supports instancing. Debug dot log error. This system doesn't support instancing and can't have debris. Later on, I will add in a value which just has like a debris, secondary debris fallback or something. But for now, we'll go ahead and say it. This system can't run this game. Sorry, I'm trying to figure this out, and I'm sure that it's not exactly the most amazing thing to listen to. Excuse me. Nobody's giving any examples of when to call it. It doesn't seem that it matters. It just goes into the queue. I think the only answer might be to make it use a non-transparent material on these, and that's really kind of a shame. I'm coming close to the end here. I've been running for a couple of hours, and I am, oh, that's weird. I borked it. Let's go ahead and try for an alpha-blended pre-multiply. Now that doesn't even have a color, does it? What if we just take it as the standard shader? I'm coming towards the end here because my brain has stopped working, as you can hear. And I am just kind of struggling with the last couple of minutes here to try and make this seem like it's more fun than it is. See, that'd work, but it needs to be lit. We want an unlit. We need a color and a texture, but unfortunately the only built-in ones are either color or texture, not both. What a pain in the ass. Particles are nice because they don't have to worry about that, but it appears that they are really, really borked. I suppose I could change that render queue and see whether that helps. It's helped with so many other things in the past couple of minutes. So this is how it was at the beginning. It looks great except for that, right? So what happens if we change the velocity material to 3001? Nothing should change, and nothing does change. Great. What happens if we change it to 2000? Nothing. I think. I can't see any difference. This is bad because obviously it's total nonsense. It's just the dumbest thing. Okay, so it's clear that I'm going to have to create a custom shader for the vector pipes because they are getting hidden behind everything when they are not anywhere near being behind them, and that's really dumb. And obviously it's just wrong. Pinker says maybe I should just render them on a different camera. That's not a bad idea. Let's do that. Let's render them on a different camera. So what we'll do is we'll switch this over to the layer of... Oh, it's already on the layer called No Light. That's interesting. I wonder why I have that layer tagged. Anyway, that happens to be the perfect setup. We'll just go ahead and pop on down to our camera. And this main camera will render everything, except we can now cull out the No Light. And that will get rid of, as far as I know, just that one thing. What we'll do now is create another camera. No, that's a video player. There's a camera. And this camera will have a... Hello? Hello? Hello, hello, hello? Hello? There we are. That was weird. This camera will just have a depth only, and it'll have a depth of 1. This is a depth of 1, so this is a depth of 2. And it's only going to render the light layer. But that'll put it on top of the ship is the problem. So if we do that, then what we end up with is it's on top of the ship, see? So if I'm going to do this, then I'm going to need to have the ship itself rendered on a different layer. If we take a look at the ship, it should be entirely on the default layer. Everything should be on the default layer. Yeah. So we can switch that over to another layer, like we'll just add in a new layer, which we will call ship. And we will tell the ship that everything on it is ship layer. And then for our rendering, our secondary rendering, we will also render the ship layer. And over here on the main camera, we will render neither of those layers. Robot Sarcasm says, wouldn't that include objects that are behind it? Well, right now, the way that I'm rendering this is not great. I think that I'm going to need to not do it this way. Because, as you might have noticed, when these things do pass through layers, the ship remains perfectly visible. So, now that I'm doing it, I don't think it's actually a good idea. I need to come up with just a special renderer that somehow doesn't screw up. Somehow doesn't screw up the depth. I don't know what's causing it to screw up the depth. What's causing it to do this? Has it been doing this whole time and I just have only noticed now? I don't know. I'll think about it later. Thanks for stopping by, you guys. This was super helpful. I got a lot done. And, of course, every time I get something done, I find a new bug that needs to be dealt with. But that's not a big issue. It's just a matter of trying to figure out why this particle system is all screwed up. Thanks for stopping by, and I will see you on Wednesday. If any of you have any advice on this sort of stuff, feel free to tell me, because I have obviously just struggling through this stuff and trying to get it to work. I'm going to go ahead and take some screenshots and then call it a day. Pinker says, what you can do is render a depth-only render on the ship in the second camera, perhaps. Yeah, but then anything that passes between the main camera and the ship gets rendered behind the ship. Oh, I see what you mean. I don't know how to do that. If you know how to do that, Pink Hair, I am all ears. I actually just don't know how, sorry. Pink Hair says that the shader he sent me 400 years ago would do it. I'm sorry, Pink Hair. It's been ages. I have a feeling that if I saw that shader now, I would feel very differently about it because, you know, back at the time I wasn't doing any shader coding and I was like, I don't know anything about shaders. Now I do. I know some stuff about shaders. Not a whole lot, but some. The good news is I can adjust the camera, which means that for the screenshot, I can just pull it away. It doesn't really look very impressive in the screenshot because the setup is crap, so I'm not going to bother to take a picture of it. Well, Pink Hair, I'd love to keep talking, but my throat is actually getting really sore. Oh, I moved the mic away. Like, I'll just keep talking after I've moved the mic away. My throat's actually really sore because I had to do voiceovers yesterday. I am barely hanging on there, so I'm going to stop. Pink Hair says I should just change the ring shader. I don't know enough about why it's screwing up to know how. I don't know how you do transparency shaders. All I know is how you do geometry shaders. To tell you the truth, the transparency, well, I guess I do want it to just be a transparency shader. I just don't know how to do it. Thank you for stopping by, everybody. If you got any comments or helpful things to say, feel free to let me know because I am always looking for better ways to do stuff. And I'll see you on Wednesday, I think, if you plan to stop by.